Well, welcome back to another episode of the Dan Time Podcast. There's a reason that I have stayed on this kick, I guess, of Dan talking to fellow Dans. I really got carried away once I realized that I didn't have to lock myself into just Dan or just a Danny. I was like, well, why don't we have some Danielles and everybody under the Dan umbrella, if you will. So as this thing has evolved, and you've seen different guests from different backgrounds. It's mostly singer-songwriters, but some kind of wild card guests. And the greatest joy that I have gotten out of this project, I mean, it's kind of funny. I don't know anybody else that's doing this, Bob talking to Bob kind of thing. But I love introducing my listeners to artists that they may have never heard of. Maybe it's outside of your wheelbox or wheelhouse. And the same for me when I do some research. I'll land on somebody that I wouldn't have had a chance to see them perform live, and they're not showing up on my Spotify recommendation, but by way of this podcast, they're being brought to life and put in front of you. So I'm just very pleased to play a small part in introducing. Who doesn't, if you're a music fan, who doesn't love saying, hey man, you got to check out this artist that I discovered? Everybody loves that. So today I am super thrilled. This is a man that comes recommended from a 2-time Dan Time guest, Danielle Moralia, a blues artist, Boston-based blues musician, and very renowned in that area. She said, you've got to have Dan King on the show. And after doing, really just scratching the surface on some research, I discovered that he's got quite the reputation up there, and his musical partners, their experience carries a lot of weight as well. The mayor of Gloucester, Massachusetts, referred to him as, well, basically he said, if you think of music around Cape Ann, this is the first name you think of, Dan King. I'm going to get back into the bio, but let me pump the brakes and just say, Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is a really big deal. And, of course, Danielle, I have a lot of respect for her. She's been a terrific guest. Great sense of humor. Just the ideal guest for the show. And when she said, you got to have Dan King, I said, okay, sure. And then I dug into the background. I said, wow, I got my work cut out for me here. You've been writing, recording, and performing music for, is it safe to say, 30 plus years?
Yeah, 30 plus years now. It's kind of unbelievable that I've been doing it this long. But yeah, I'm still enjoying it and still writing. And yeah, we got a record in the works right now.
And right at the forefront, we'll get into some of the deep background stuff, but KBMG is your primary focus. And this pulls together David Brown, Dave Maddox, and Wolf Janandis.
Janandis, yeah.
And some people might not remember, or maybe they do, David Brown worked in the studio and toured with Billy Joel on the famous 1978 record 52nd Street, and then also in support of the Stormfront record.
Yeah, he's basically on everything, but I have to honor Dave, because Dave actually passed away last summer. He had a bout with cancer, and for about a year and a half, it went pretty quick, and so we lost Dave. So that's what we're working on. This is actually good timing to be on the podcast, because we're just getting into finishing up the recordings we had started a couple of years ago before we got sick. So we're really honoring Dave with his last work and our last work together as KBMG. But that band definitely has been my focus since about 2001. I think we started recording together, and then we really became a band about 2004, 2005, because we just started just being on the same kind of gigs. I was hiring them for gigs, and we just decided, well, it's a band now.
Well, I'm sure sorry for your loss, and I unfortunately didn't uncover that he had passed away.
Yeah, what a talent. I got to spend a lot of time. So Dave was on, basically everything from 52nd Street up through Stormfront. So he was with Billy all through the 80s. All those big records, Glass Houses, and Nylon Curtain. He also played with Simon and Garfunkel, the concert in Central Park. But he was a Gloucester guy, and he loved it up here. He loved to be on his boat. And he, after we got off the road with Billy, he just decided to come back here and hang out. And I was lucky enough that I was just coming up at the time in the 90s. And I had a record deal on a small label called Rotary back in the 90s, playing some rock and roll stuff. And David had a studio over on Eastern Point in Gloucester, and that's how we really first connected. I started working at the studio, and there was a local place that's still there called the Rum Line, where we used to hang out with a guy named Fly Amiro. Fly's over the mic, and David sit in, and I would bartend, and we all became kind of chummy around those times and became lifelong friends after that.
Well, I love how that stuff happens, and then you might be working on one project 1 year for a couple of years, but you don't lose sight of these people. You maybe sit in on jam sessions or keep up, and then the time is right to go full throttle back into a project with them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all had Dave played with not just KBMG. He had other people he did studio work with and other little projects. And I had the same. I had other bands that I played with, but KBMG was definitely, like, I think a lot of our favorite, projects to work on. But and because of the caliber of the other players too. When you have Dave Maddox on drums, who you're probably going to talk about, who his resume is pretty amazing. And Wolf is just one of the favorite bass players in the Boston area as well. And Maddox obviously came over around 2001 from England. He'd been a top session player for Paul McCartney, amongst others, George Harrison, and Elton John over in England. And then he kind of came over here, and he's been in Marblehead ever since. So about 20 plus years now, and I've been working with him since he got here.
Well, just last night, when I got the kids back home, and down here, so I'm on the Gulf Coast of Florida. It was kind of warm and maybe a little balmy enough to leave the screen open, leave the door open, and I queued up on my my music player the Live at Chianti album. Yeah. And in wintertime, once that starts rocking, I had to go back out in the driveway to get something, and I turn around, I'm like, man, my house sounds like Stevie Ray Vaughan is playing in there. It's man, that was the vibe that I got from that song. And this was after kind of listening to some of the solo records and some of the other flavors of your catalog, and I was like, wow, this is people that I guess go see you live and have followed you for a number of years. They might see you in one setting with just an acoustic guitar, and then they see you with the full group, and you can wow them in different ways.
Yeah, well, there's a nice artist community up here on Cape Ann. We're north of Boston by about 30 miles, if people don't know the area. And, but it's close enough to Boston where if you do need to go to the city, and New York, it really isn't that far away. You can do New York in a day. It takes about 4 hours to drive, a little longer. But there's a nice artist community. It's famous for that. We're on the coast, there's beautiful vistas everywhere. And one of the oldest artist colonies in the country, I think, is Rocky Neck. I think it might be the first artist colony in the country is over in Gloucester here where we are. And so it was just, lots to do. Right, we'd be playing little restaurant gigs, but then when we did the restaurant gigs, we had this one standing, residency. We used to play every Tuesday night at a little Mexican place called Jalapenos. And that's how and that was kind of like just more like a paid rehearsal in a way. We'd have dinner, we'd try new stuff, we'd just have fun, we'd play some cover songs, and just hang out and have a good time. But it really became, to have that steady gig every Tuesday night for 20-something years was just great, for any band, I think, and that's why I think when you hear it on Live at Chianti, that's why we're so tight and it sounds so good, because we just played together a lot. And then we would do these, these ticketed events, which were more on the original side. We'd throw in a couple covers, and sometimes we do them electric, or we do a coffee house more an acoustic style. And so we would just do stuff and have fun. And but I'm so glad you appreciate that. You got to hear Wintertime, because that's Dave playing some electric slide on that, and we have some people coming up from New York a lot, and they walk into these little restaurants where we're playing, they can't believe what they're hearing. and I'm glad you got to recognize that.
Oh yeah, it was definitely a double take head turn for me, and I'm sure you get that response. People walking in just to get a cold beverage or something. They're like, "Whoa, what? Wow, we lucked out tonight."
Yeah. Right, and that happens a lot up here. And it really is amazing. I bartended for years when I was younger, and I've been out of it for a long time, for about 10 years in my 20s, and I was booking, in clubs. And my gig nowadays, I'm a concert production over at a beautiful venue called the Shaolin Lu in Rockport, Mass, which is a gorgeous kind of chamber music room, but we have folk and blues and other things, which is, it's beautiful. But, I started out down there, and when I'd be bartending, you just see people walking exactly. They're coming off the street. They want a burger, maybe a beer, and they look over. They go, "Who's that? What is going on here?" I go, "Yeah, that's Dave Maddox and David Brown and Wolf." And Wolf works at Berkeley School of Music outside there for many years. So you have these really, really top seasoned players who've seen a lot of big joints, and it's so great to have them. Well, and when I'm not working with Dave Maddox, actually the guy who started the Jalapenos gig with Wolf and I was actually a guy named Russ Lawton. And his gig he's the Trey Anastasio band drummer. He's been doing that gig since the 90s. But he moved to Vermont, so now he was too far away. So we couldn't gig together like locally as much. But he would still come by, a few times a year. And if you look it up, the last record I actually officially released is with Russ. He's on drums on that one.
That's the Ocean and Rose?
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at that's with Russ Lawton, Ray Peskowski, who's the piano player for the Trey Anastasio band, and a bunch of other great players on that record.
Now, I wanted to ask you on Ocean and Rose, is it Lydia that sings the female vocals on a few of those tracks?
Yeah, Lydia. Yeah, she's fantastic.
Just some really great, it feels like a nice melting pot of different voices, and there's some piano on the record, I think, on...
there's piano all over that
all
record.
Over it, yeah.
Speaking of Russ, right, that's the connection. During the pandemic a bit, David and some of the other guys were kind of lying a bit low. I had some songs, and I wanted to go visit Russ. And so I went up to Vermont and recorded up at the Tank in Burlington, a great studio, and we got Russ and Ray. And Wolf actually got on that session with me. Wolf came up, and because before we had KBMG, Wolf and I and Russ were in a group together. So, it's all, we're all working together. But, yeah, even though Russ moved and people are far away, we still try to get together and make some art.
Dan, I've actually got the record, the EP, queued up here. If you want to play any particular track on here that you'd like to include in the episode.
Yeah, you know what? I love that one, the Soul Band song, Darling Voices.
Darling Voices.
Lydia, just talking about Lydia right there, she did an unbelievable job on the chorus of that. She really took it to another level. And it's a special song for me because it was a song that was written during the pandemic, which is, I know, a while ago now, but it kind of reminds me to be thankful because at the time, you couldn't kind of travel out of state, and you couldn't go to New York. I was talking earlier about, how New York's 4-hour drive, and I would sometimes go down and do a gig and come back in the same day. And just, I like hanging out in New York City. I've always loved New York City, even being from Boston. It's a great city. So I was just kind of talking. I was just kind of imagining being down in New York and some nice things about New York, about seeing the street musicians and the tall buildings and all that kind of fun stuff. So yeah, let's try that one.
All right. Well, folks, this is a little piece of Darling Voices, and I'll do a fade out. So if you like what you hear, you can find all of Dan's music. This will be in the show notes as well, but wherever you listen, whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, and most of the stuff is on YouTube as well. But let's check out Darling Voices.
1, 2, 3. Soul band on the street, they got a good message for the money at their feet. I swear one of them is looking, yeah, and it's sticking to the beat. Here it comes, darling, for it says. Check out the traffic lights. It's a sea green tonight. Gonna have a street truck bite with shining jewels surrounding our little piece of life. Here it comes, darling, for it says. Do you still know the reasons? Kind of seasons we've always stuck around this life. Good times, sad times, and the bad times. You can't see the beauty of the flaw. So close together in the cool, I can hear the music gathering on the stool. Just my imagination, temptations on a loop with smoky miracles, darling, voices.
Wow, how about that? And that little ode to the Temptations there as well.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about all those nice things about New York, and you go by some of the parks, and there's always a band or something going on. Go by strawberry fields, and all kinds of imagery was coming to me. So, yeah.
Dan, you had you were in New York for a while at kind of a, I don't know if transitional time is the right way to say it, but maybe during, after, or during 9/11, right after 9/11, kind of those early 2000s years.
Yeah, I was there. I was, I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I was, so I started going down, playing some gigs with my own stuff, and then I joined a group called Luke Temple. This guy, Luke Brenneman, who was a local from the North Shore originally, and I was recording him. We were making demos, and then he moved down to Williamsburg when that was just kind of coming up. That became kind of a cool scene, and so I never actually moved down there, but I was going down there probably every other weekend for a few years, and playing a lot of gigs. Got to play the Knitting Factory, and what was some of the other places? Baby Jupiter, Arlene's Grocery, these kind of cool clubs that were down there at the time, and that was more on the indie genre. It wasn't quite. I mostly what I do is probably folk and roots and that kind of stuff since my late 20s. Actually, when I was with Dave, when I was really young, that was 92, 93 when I was hanging out with him. Originally, that was the grunge era, so we were probably a little more heavy then. But I always had that strain of folk and blues and all that, folk rock coming through it. Bands like Uncle Tupelo and Wilco, I think, were the other bands that were carrying that torch, and we were right there with them. But we never, obviously, didn't sell as many records.
Well, and around this time, I guess after working with Luke, you recorded the Woolly Mammoth and High and Dry record. Is it the same timeline, 2003 or 4?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so Luke was probably like late 90s, and then he was down in New York, and then he went out to like Seattle, I think. He got a record deal, and so he went to the West Coast. I stayed around here, and I had another record with my friend James Cohen, I think was on that one, and my friend Burke Sampson and Wolf and Russ were on that record, and we actually recorded at Woolly Mammoth, which is this guy Dave Minahan, and I had a great studio in Boston. And High and Dry was a band called Morphine, Mark Sandman, and he had a studio over in Cambridge, and we recorded a bunch of songs there as well. We were lucky to kind of get him in that space because that's where he had lived, and that was a great experience as well. Yeah, it's just right. That was that time, Even though I've also been in management for a long time in concert production and booking. I've always just, like I said, ever since the 90s and the early 2000, late 90s, early 2000s, when I had after my record deals kind of went away, I just still kept making records, and I still do, even though it's not my main income. I just still love to do it. And this is one of the reasons why you can kind of check it out, and you can go back and visit what I was doing in 2003.
I mean, it's such a rich catalog, Dan, and some people maybe would have just like pulled the plug and moved on, or just spent a decade doing something else. But you kept writing, kept making music. That tells me that you're just an artist at heart. You're always going to pick up the guitar. You're always going to have the notebook there, right? I mean, you've got to just have notebooks or however you catalog your lyrics. But do you have like a box full of lyrics that have been used and not used and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, I got tons of stuff, and since the advent of obviously with personal computers and all that and phones and I love it because there was one thing back in the days of notebooks where I could write down the chords and I could write down the words to, like I say, an idea, but to record it, you really had to get into the studio back in the old days. It was kind of hard. You maybe could use a small tape deck or something. And even setting that up or a mic, but you would lose something, if I went back and looked at the chords and the words, I'd be like, yeah, okay, looks good, but I'm not sure what the vibe was, what was the feeling behind it, that kind of inspired it. And now, I mean, with iPhones and what you have now with the computers and all the home recording and Pro Tools, it's great because I can just go back and I have actually probably more voice memos than notebooks nowadays.
Yep.
I can be walking down the street and I got a word or a melody in my head, and I just hit that voice memo on my iPhone, and I can get the idea going. And so I go back, one once in a while to get some time, and I haven't completed anything. I'll start going through those old notes and those memos and find some nuggets.
Another thing I like about your records and different projects is that an old song might resurface at a later point, like Belle Audrey, the very first song from the very first Pearls record, 1996, comes back. Belle Audrey revisited on the Woolly Mammoth and High and Dry, and then Santa Fe Jack shows up on a live record. There's a few other examples too.
Yes, it's the beauty of it. Certain songs, they just kind of stick around. They just kind of hang out. And it's funny, the longevity. And this also has to do with crowd response. We go out and do gigs and people make requests. And certain songs, they just work. Certain songs work in a live situation. I'm glad you brought up that original Belle Audrey from the Pros, because actually the drummer on that one was Nelson Bragg, who spent like 20 years with Brian Wilson, another guy who was a Gloucester guy, Rockport guy, who moved out to the West Coast, went to L.A., and ended up being in the Brian Wilson band, and they did Smile, and they won Grammys and all kinds of stuff. But we're still in touch. When he comes to town, we hang out. And he just messaged me like 2 days ago. He's still out in L.A. But we still have all these connections of people that we've worked with, and that's the beauty of music too, is you make these really great friendships and connections.
I bet you have people talking about song requests at shows. Do you ever have people that say, hey, will you play this song? And you have to tell them, look, I'd love to, but I actually it actually works better in this setting than where we are here.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's the case. That's all time and a place. Being in management, when I was able to work with this guy, Jamie Kehoe, he was kind of a Hollywood guy and really fun guy. And another guy, he was from upstate New York originally, but again, spending a lot of time out on the West Coast. And he came back here, and we were working together in Gloucester. And he always would tell me, he goes, you got to pay attention. Just pay attention. Look around. And that always stuck with me playing live because, it's got to be the right time and the right place, the right situation. You might want to be pleasing one person, but at the expense of everybody else. And that has a lot to do with, what kind of venue is it? Is it really an original venue with or depending on the volume of the song? If it's a really rocking song, it's really, if we're doing an acoustic event or it's a quieter kind of place. And then it goes the other way. If we're really in a rocking club and playing an electric gig on a Saturday night, and somebody comes up and asks for like a really slow acoustic ballad in the middle of a Saturday night, we might be like, you know what, probably not the best time to play this one. You know? So you do what you can, and you try to please everybody, but that's obviously impossible. And most people are very understanding, because at least we let them know it's like, yeah, we love that song, thank you. We do appreciate, people listening and loving it, but yeah, time and place.
Dan, I really like some of the stuff that you were putting out there. Seems like 2017, 18 was a particularly busy year. The You're Not Alone record, and I want to say this is just Dan and acoustic guitar. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It was just one of those things. At one point, I think it just became part of just doing things I'd always wanted to do. Like I said, I was making most of my money. I mean, I still make money playing gigs, and I still do that. But I also, like I said, doing the managing takes a lot of time too. So it did become about like just doing things I wanted to do. It's like, I always wanted to do an acoustic record. Let's do that. And then I did a couple of EPs that were more experimental. And I got an old friend, a saxophone player named Mike Tucker involved, and I think Russ Lawton again. And that was the reason behind that. It was just like, okay, let's do some experimental stuff and kind of scratch that itch. Because, when I'm not writing, I actually listen to a lot of jazz. I love Weather Report, and Wayne Shorter, and I was just listening to Wes Montgomery the other day. But then I'll go listen to, lots of singer-songwriters too. So, again, just trying to, the freedom of actually being an independent artist all these years is that I can do that. And that is one of the pluses of the modern world, where you can, like, do it yourself, and you can do it on Pro Tools or go in the studio and you can release it yourself. And it really does give you that freedom to kind of do whatever you want.
I wrote down a few songs there's so many. I think you must have, at this point, recorded at least 150, 200 songs. That may be even a conservative estimate.
Right, yeah, right. Because then I had a band called, we had the Proles. I had another band called the Bandit Kings, which was, and again, another thing I always wanted to try. I just being a writer and hearing my songs sung by two beautiful female vocalists, where I could actually, I have my own kind of range, which is probably more in the Bob Dylan, Mark Knopfler, Lou Reed range. I'm not known as a big operatic Freddie Mercury kind of singer. So this allowed my writing to actually really kind of push those boundaries by writing for somebody else.
Now, one of those Bandit Kings records I was reading got in rotation on Sirius XM, the Meg Griffin Show, Having Words with Meg.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the third one.
Yeah, no, Epic Hello. We had an EP, our first record, and then the second full length was called Epic Hello. And she did an interview with us. She heard the band. She loved the band, and she put us on the Loft. And then we did a show with her. Yeah, Having Words with Meg. And we had Dave Maddox help me produce it, so he was interviewed. Yeah, that was a real highlight. And then we got to go out and we played some gigs in LA. We got on the road a little bit with that band because people really were responding very well at the time.
There's a song I was just listening to, I guess yesterday, "Battle with the Day" from the 2013 record. What a, that kind of reminded me of kind of an old country gospel overtones. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but just the melodies, the vocals in that song.
That's Renee Dupuy. Mm-hmm. And so she's local. She's from the North Shore, but she lives in Gloucester now. And so she does the lead on that one. So a lot of that band was Anne-Marie would do a lot of the leads, and Renee would do harmonies, and because she had a bit of a higher voice. But on that one, we chose Renee because it was a much more of a delicate song, and Renee's more of a trained singer. She went to school for singing. And so she did an amazing job. And she did so well, I was like, well, we got to get some strings on this. So I remember I think we got some violin and cello on that one, and really kind of got the feeling for that. And then I remember writing that song actually because a friend had passed. And, sometimes it gets dark and cold up here in the north. Yeah. And I was just kind of ruminating about that. And I think that's where that song, pretty sure that's where that song came from, if I remember correctly, of what was going on at the time.
Yeah, and that theme, I feel like it returns, like you said, the that New England winter, which Raggedy is another song that I know you've talked about. It's just kind of talking about how you feel day in, day out in that.
Yeah, it's funny. We're having a pretty good winter right now. I'm actually enjoying it because there's a lot of snow on the ground. And so when there's lots of snow on the ground, at least it's pretty.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes those winters, like in Massachusetts, where we're not in the mountains, so we really don't get as much snow, and it's just kind of gray and rainy and cold and just, for a long time. But it's a good time to make a stew.
Now, jumping again kind of clear across the way here, I don't remember exactly what year this was. Maybe this is mid-2000s as well, 05, 06. You spent some time with Whoopi Goldberg rehearsing for an NBC special.
Yeah. So I mentioned Jamie from Hollywood. So they did a movie up here it's a pretty famous movie called The Perfect Storm. I don't know if you heard of it, but it was a big storm. I was actually in college when the actual storm happened, and I knew some of the people involved, actually, and I knew all of their families. I'm from the area. So that was a big deal. The Perfect Storm came to town. They did a big blockbuster, and big, George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg and all these people were hanging around. And that's how Jamie came to town. He was working on that movie, and he looked around Gloucester at this one kind of club, and decided, he goes, you know what? He wanted to get out of Hollywood, kind of get back towards New York, and he wanted to invest. So going back to how we started with the mayor, basically what happened was he came to town. He asked around, who should I talk to about getting music for this club I want to start? And my name kind of floated to the top, and we started working together. And at the time, I didn't really realize this, but yeah, he was very good friends with Whoopi Goldberg. He'd been working with her for about 20 years. And so we got together, and she had just gotten an NBC show, and they were going to do a Christmas special. But then, things changed, and, I think that, as things do in that business, and that kind of fell through, but that was the introduction. And so we ended up working together. I got to work with Whoopi for a few years. And before she got on The View, there was like a little gap between the NBC show and The View. And we did some shows together and hung out a lot. And she was great. She introduced me to Keith Richards.
I was reading that. Man, talk about a moment you'll probably never forget.
Well, it's funny because right before then, I as we're walking down, we're hanging out the Stones, so I'm standing there. And on that same night, after I come out of the dressing room after meeting Keith, and then about an hour later, I'm meeting Tom Brady.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was an interesting day.
So man.